Welcome to this session with the title, Corporate Sustainability and Responsible Competitiveness. Is it a myth or a reality? Our conversation today is in the impacts track of Spark, as we believe that inclusion and innovation will lead to impact that is ethical and sustainable and makes this a better place from an ESG perspective. That's environmental, social governance. While the SDG standards were established in 2015, there aren't that many organizations that have embraced it with the passion and commitment that is a need of the hour. ITC is one of the few organizations who has set their own sustainability goals and have shown tremendous progress. And hence, I'm delighted to welcome here Mr. Shiv Kumar, Group Head, Agri and IT Businesses at ITC Limited, today to talk us through this, especially looking at sustainability and how it can become a competitive advantage, what he's been able to successfully achieve, and how ITC continues to adapt, evolve in this changing new world. So welcome, Shiv. Delighted to have you here with us.
Thank you, Sumit. Thanks for having me on the session.
Thanks. So, there are multiple dimensions of sustainability, and I'm sure we can talk about lots of them today. But I thought one which I know is very close to your heart and something which is so important from an India perspective is agriculture. So I thought maybe we could spend some time talking about that, especially when we look at agriculture and the fact that it provides livelihood for more than half of our population. And also the sector is so vulnerable to so many changes, and especially when we look at whether it's climate change, soil, environment, etc., that it would be great to hear from you what you feel the role of technology and data science can play in improving agriculture and farming.
Yeah, I think a great start and the right focus. If there is some hope in making agriculture sustainable, and I'll talk about what actually I mean when I say making agriculture sustainable. Technology gives an enormous hope that from what we were to what we could be, technology can make a huge difference. It's a multidimensional problem when it comes to looking at agriculture. At one level, we say that agriculture has prospered, but farmers have remained in poverty. So that means raising farmers' income becomes an important issue. At another level, from a consumer perspective, while we have achieved food self-sufficiency at a macro level, there are some consumers who still can't afford and don't get unless there is government giving free food. There is a lot of hidden hunger in the form of nutrition insecurity. So we need to deal with that in terms of what is the right kind of food for people. And the third piece is really that we have been depleting natural resources very, very rapidly. Water, topsoil. We need to deal with that challenge. And on top of that, there is a climate challenge that you just mentioned. Uncertainty and quite erratic in terms of what the weather is going to do. So now to deal with all of this, you need to do farming more precisely than what we have done in the past, and precision farming as it is called. And that's where technology comes. That's one part. I'll talk about another angle from technology. Farmers have done, for times immemorial, made use of data and did farming precisely. To look at how does a particular crop respond to this kind of seed and this kind of irrigation. So what is action and what is the response in the farming is something farmer has learned through experience. Then there is external events in terms of what is happening to weather and therefore what should I change in my agronomic practice. But all of that has become more complex now because there are many more crops being grown because of the consumer demand. And like we just talked about, there is a shortage of natural resource and therefore you need to be very precise in terms of how much you will use. And the uncertainty in terms of whether, therefore, you need to respond immediately as to how should I change my practice if there is impending weather change, pest attack, and things like that. Now, therefore, all these data points, when they're gathered through technology, and then create algorithms which will help in terms of what is the best outcome for a certain kind of an input, that can go as a decision support system to the farmer. And that's when the precision farming can occur. So this is one example of how technology can help in improving the precision farming. At a more macro level, in India in particular, we have been more a production-driven supply system. We were a shortages economy, therefore that was quite all right to do it that way. We grow what we can and then take it to the market. Now that led to a lot of wastage along the supply chain. At the post-harvest stage, around the logistics chain, at the warehouses before consumption, and along this whole chain. Here also data can and technology can make a difference. We need to make our value chains more demand responsive. That means you send the demand signals back to production system. And then accordingly you decide in terms of what to plant, when to plant, and those kind of decisions, so that you are aligning your production with what is likely to be in demand rather than doing it on the base of last season's demand. So that will also reduce wastage. That's a precision, you can say, handling system.
Right.
I think in these kinds of ways one can work on. And there are many more, but broadly these are the kind of ways in which technology and data science can play a role in improving the agriculture sustainability.
Sure, thank you. And do you think with so many startups in technology and agri startups, let's talk about, and so much advancement happening in technology and innovation, is there enough focus on the agri sector? Or do you think there's need to divert more brains and minds and data science and technologists to focus on agriculture for some of the things that you talked about? I think the farm to table wastage, we hear so much in the developing countries. In the developed countries, it's more wastage at the table, at the consumption level. But I think in India, we really suffer with a lot getting lost from the farm to table. So what do you think of all the agri-tech startups? Do you think they are working in these areas and finding the right solutions?
Yeah, the digital technology induction into agriculture started a little later compared to many other sectors, but it is gaining momentum. The amount of investment that has flown into the agri sector in the last 3 or 4 years has been significantly larger than what we have seen in the previous 10 years. So those who have started 10 years ago have started maturing in terms of their solutions and refining. So certainly there is action now in terms of bringing solutions to the farmer, whether it is micro-local weather forecasting or what leads to agronomic advisory based on that, or whether it is more sharper application of inputs, risk assessment for financial services, surveillance for insurance, assessment of pest attack, potential pest attack based on remote sensing, also using artificial intelligence for quality assaying. So the number of interesting solutions that have been worked on by many of the agri startups. And so it's been a little late start, but I think it's gaining momentum for sure.
And thank you for that information. And I know you are personally also associated with a lot of these and helping and supporting. So that's really nice. When one looks at the Indian agriculture sector, the fact is that 86% of our farmers are small and marginal farmers. So how much of this agri-tech technology innovation really reaches them? And I mean, I guess to some extent, we need to look at what we say frugal innovation, right? Because it has to reach those small marginalized farmers. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the innovation itself doesn't need to be frugal. I think there is a gap in reaching. You're very right. That, you know, when all of these technologies figure a way in terms of how to solve a given problem and how to reach it to the farmers and then for them to adopt all those recommended practices, there is a gap in the form of how to integrate all these different solutions. The various solutions that I talked about, we call them point solutions. So each of them is focusing on one problem and applying some technology to solve it. But at a farmer's level, you need to really resolve the end-to-end. Okay, if I'm told the pest is going to attack, what do I do with that information? And assuming I have the knowledge through another application to say that, no, this is the kind of a treatment that you need to give. If I have to invest that money, how do I manage my risk if it was going to be changing weather later on? And so it is really an end-to-end. And if assuming I do all this, will I have market at a right price and so on. So therefore, you require somebody in the form of a solution integrator that many of these point solutions are brought together. And you also need to deliver on the ground. You know, all of these are technologies, and therefore you can deliver through them to the smartphones and other kinds of mobile gadgets. But very few farmers have access to that. You need to deliver that through some kind of an assisted access, what you call as a physical system. It's not completely digital. You need a physical access also. So that's the kind of a role, for example, eChoupal of ITC has played and evolved into to integrate many of these solutions and deliver them on ground through a phygital mechanism, that you have a physical interface. Some of the demonstration has to happen on my farm or my neighbor's farm for me to get convinced as a small farmer. I can't take all that risk myself. So you need to complement with that kind of action also on the ground. On-ground delivery of various inputs, the financial services. So stitching them together and ensuring there's a complementary physical infrastructure. That kind of an action needs to be played by different sets of players. Need not necessarily be people who are innovating active. They can play, but this role also needs to be played. And then it reaches the smaller farmers.
And you spoke about the eChoupal initiative. I know you've been the pioneer of that, and it's currently in its 4.0 version currently.
That's right.
So it'll be great to hear how that has evolved, especially in the pandemic time, and what are some of the new initiatives you may have taken to make it even more successful and effective on the eChoupal?
Yeah. So I think this is a 20-year-old initiative, and therefore in good measure, we moved over to fourth round now, 4.0 as you mentioned. In the first instance, it was primarily a value chain reorganization of various agricultural chains to identify where there is inefficiency, where a new value can be created for the farmer or for the consumer, what kind of activities will help, what technology needs to be inducted there. So it was 1.0. Actually, when we launched, we didn't call it 1.0 because we thought that's all there is to it.
Right.
But as we moved on, the demand from the farmers was on extension services, a lot more in terms of farming support and financial services, something similar to what I just spoke about. And we said, what really started as a sourcing infrastructure for ITC, and that's where the value chain reorganization was required to make it more efficient. We saw that the same infrastructure can be used for reverse flow of goods and services. And that reverse flow, whether it is farming knowledge or financial services or farm inputs, and in due course of time, it also evolved into consumer goods and also for our own social investments in water and such other things. So all of that set of initiatives we called 2.2. In fact, there were several models made it 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and so on. And similarly, 2.1, 2, and 3. So it is 2.x. So after some period, we saw that with many of the partners that we brought in to make the 2.0 happen, we are creating larger ecosystems. And that whole ecosystem can be offered as a service to other potential partners, which is where employment exchange kind of initiative, the healthcare provision in rural India, and brand building for marketing companies mechanization, making it Uberized and offering it to farmers. So those kind of ecosystem as a service became the 3.x. And right now in the 4th version, we are bringing more technology than what we have ever done in the 1, 2, and 3. If in 1.0 at a broad level, we say maybe there was about 10% of technology, the essential enabling internet that was there, and to receive it in the villages, we had to put up VSAT equipment and that kind of stuff. To possibly now nearly 40% of all action is technology. We still need 60% physical, like I said, as a physical kind of a model. But now we call this as a meta market. Many startups, the agri-techs that I talked about, conventional agri companies, so all of them ride on this platform as a plug and play, delivering an integrated solutions to the farmers. So that meta market is the 4.0 version that is there. So in keeping with the maturity of the market, evolutions of farmer needs and progress in technology, and the liberalization that is happening on the farm laws and so on, the whole model also evolved during this period and got into 4.0 at this time. Right now, we have completed large-scale pilots in 4.0 last year, and having demonstrated success, now we are blueprinting its scale-up pan-India.
That's really nice. That's really nice. And what's the spread? How many villages get covered as part of this overall initiative?
So right now, in terms of the amount of reach is about 70,000 villages, reaching 4 million farmers. And after rolling out 4.0 in full scale, it will touch about 120,000 villages, and 10 million farmers will be touched.
Wow.
So that is the extent of coverage across 12 different value chains in terms of grains and oilseeds and vegetables and fruits and pulses and aquaculture and some plantation crops. So across 12 different value chains. It's pretty much the length and breadth in terms of scale and multiple value chains of the scope on which it can operate. But that's the power of technology.
That's true.
That exists. That's the power of how you integrate a physical model for a domain like agriculture.
Sure. I mean, these numbers sound really impressive. I'm sure this must have been a very, very challenging task. How do you drive this large-scale change in such a big conglomerate, as well as with all the partners that you're talking about? What's the secret sauce?
Conglomerate, one of the benefits, I mean, if you use conglomerate, for example, to talk about the diverse businesses of ITC,
yeah,
each business possesses a certain kind of capability. You know, the company's core business of consumer-oriented FMCG business, the consumer understanding, product development, trade marketing and distribution, distributed manufacturing. So all of these kinds of capabilities come as part of that business. Hotels, for example, understands the recipes and the cuisines and the consumer palate across different parts of the country. Yeah. And so printing and packaging understand the barrier properties and the implications of cost of packaging material, sustainability of packaging material, and so on. Agribusiness understand the farmers, farming value chains, and logistics related to all of this. So I think one benefit of a conglomerate is that you can create a level of collaboration that is not as easy when you are multiple external companies. So therefore, when we say that, no, I can bring higher incomes to the farmers by reorganizing the value chain. And that also helps me source more efficiently the right quality of material. So I'm saving cost and raising farmer income is something which is possible because the value chain is anchored by a brand which requires a particular kind of quality. So I think that is one benefit. But in terms of how do you drive change as the core of your question, you know, when the sauce, if I were to articulate, is really that first you really need to think big. That, okay, the opportunities of this magnitude, then it will get attention of the people who control resources, which is the top management, to say that, okay, this is worth our while doing. And yet you need to start small because you need to de-risk and make your execution modular. And then you need to iterate rapidly, because many things you roll out on the ground, especially when they are social experiments of this kind, that you can't design something in your laboratory and say, now it will be a success. It's a social experiment. You need to work with people, how people respond, react, how they participate, and all of that. So therefore, you need to iterate rapidly. And then you really scale in tune with your think big. So I think that's the kind of a process that we had followed, and it has stood us in good stead.
Well said. I think the iteration is very important, because there will always be learnings, and that should help you to relook at things, and taking the small step, baby step at a time, I believe is always valuable, right? So you have the bigger picture in mind, but one step at a time is something that always helps. Related to what you were just talking about, investments and agri-tech, today there's a lot of talk in the investors' world of impact investment, and then the ECG matrix. But in reality, do you think that the investors really understand the lead time that it takes, especially in the agri sector, where the ROI may not be as quick as maybe some of the others, fintech, etc., or the fact that there needs to be, the patient capital has to be for a little longer time? So do you think that the investors understand, are prepared, and hence are applying the right yardstick and matrix to really make this possible and successful for the agri sector?
Yeah, you're right. Despite iterating very rapidly, you still need a long time before many of these investments really fructify into real benefits for the farmers, and therefore business value for people who are creating these enterprises. And therefore, the capital needs to be patient. People who invest in this sector do understand, but I think the solution just doesn't stop there, because there are only so many of them and only so much money can come like that. But the whole approach needs to be more ecosystem oriented, in the sense that the very way in which the venture capital ecosystem is designed, it's like baton passing from angel seed stage investing to prototyping, then getting into pilot, and then getting into scale, then getting into growth. You have multiple series thereafter, series A, B, C. So I think that whole ecosystem is somewhat underdeveloped in case of impact investments, where the whole stage of prototyping itself will take some time for the innovator to refine it and make it relevant to the end user, like farmer in this case, we're talking about agri, and whatever be the other case. And that iteration in even designing prototype itself that works may require some kind of a technology grants, which will make it worth that person to take that kind of a risk. So maybe there is at that stage, that kind of support is also required in the stage where typically the conventional bootstrapping and angel funding is not sufficient. And therefore it doesn't even get to a series A in terms of funding. So understanding these dynamics and the length of time it takes, rather than one impact investor thinking of saying that, no, let me look at a 10-year patience, then people who are funding them in turn could lose those lose that patience. And therefore, how do you create somewhat more uniquely relevant for impact investment, this kind of a series, so that each leg passes on to the next leg in the usual 3 to 5 year kind of time frame, but for the investee, it's a little longer kind of a journey, which is held by somebody or other. The other kind of ecosystem is also necessary. That like I talked about a little earlier, point solution and the solution integrator angle.
Yeah.
So no point solution by itself can transform some of these sectors. So therefore, whether it is the investor, company itself, or an aggregator of as a platform, should look at a portfolio of investee companies that are synergistically really creating that kind of a transformative value, so that each one is playing their role. And at a larger level, somebody who's doing a better weather forecasting must necessarily have in the ecosystem somebody who's converting that into an economic advice. Somebody converting that into a specific input marketing. So I think, how do you create a portfolio of investee companies so that together they can be more transformative? So these two ecosystem approaches will really make it much more effective than many islands of excellence.
And I hope that we have some potential investors and potential innovators and entrepreneurs listening to some of these conversations, so that they can take some of these cues and take it ahead to build some of these aggregators and the balanced ecosystem. I think that would really be helpful. You know, since you're talking about ecosystems and partnerships, I recall something that you wrote some time ago about for a more balanced achievement of wealth, welfare, and well-being, as it's envisaged in the SDGs. We need to see ourselves as partners rather than merely as parts doing their little bit. And this is something you're also talking about in your earlier discussion. So whether we talk of government, whether we talk of academia, whether we talk of corporates, NGOs, so how do you think these partnerships can work based on your experience? Because I know ITC has done a lot of these CSR projects with 100+ NGOs, multiple governments, and 20, 30 technical scientific institutions, and many more partnerships, I'm sure. How do you make these partnerships work?
Yeah, absolutely. Like technology trigger, when you open the conversation, the second big facilitator is going to be partnerships. So you're spot on that. And the partnership is again a very cliched word, and everybody talks about partnerships. But there are more failed partnerships than there are successful partnerships. I think what, in our own experience, what would make it work is to start with the respect amongst all the partners, that together we can accomplish more than what each of us can ever think of achieving. So complementarity needs to be appreciated by everybody for real. People do start with by saying that no, public as in government brings something to the table, private brings something to the table, and the NGO sector, academia, and all of the different people bring different skills. But quite often, the level of appreciation that with the other partners' support is what our integrated solution can be far superior than we can ever imagine ourselves. I think that appreciation is the starting point. And time needs to be spent on arriving at that. The second bit really is that for any partnership, is that someone has to orchestrate it, be responsible for the outcome, although there are multiple players and there's no first among equal in many of these partnerships. But someone has to play the role of an orchestrator, like in a symphony. So many people play, but how do you get a wonderful music out of a symphony? Is because someone is orchestrating. If somebody has to be silent at a point of time, somebody has to play at a peak pitch at a different point of time, depending on the needs of what is required. That orchestration has to be one of these partners who will play that role. But the natural obligation of this orchestrator is that in the partnership, everybody has a give and everybody has an ask. Because that's the way individual players will then play in that. So orchestrator has to really balance the aggregate of gives and asks so that the whole partnership is stable. and also to balance the individual gives and asks. So that whole effort is really the obligation of an orchestrator. So that is a second and very important kind of an element in making partnerships work. And the last piece is really some kind of a review rhythm, a program management, that you meet, communicate with each other enough and more times so that any course correction, any early warning is picked up, rather than after something has not gone right, then typically you are accusing somebody. But you otherwise also have a review rhythm which is more frequent, appropriate frequency. Then you are more likely to focus on the issue than on accusing one of the partners for a failure or not enough success. I think these kind of things would really make partnerships work.
Yeah, I really like what you said, the three areas to be, because frankly, in any kind of partnership or even personal professional relationships, I think each of these three of mutual respect and appreciation and some give and ask or give and take, it's always a two-way. And everyone looks at it for what's in it for me or what's in it for them. And then having that review mechanism is really important, and course correction. But who do you think can play the role of the orchestrator in this? Is it individuals, corporates, governments, NGOs? Who would be more suitable?
Yeah, I think each initiative or a project will have a naturally right orchestrator. There is no predetermined saying that no one type of entity can only be an orchestrator. There are many programs and projects where government would be the right orchestrator, in many places where corporates would be, and many places where NGOs could be. So it really depends on what is the key for the success of that particular project. And therefore, who has the power to be an orchestrator? While theoretically any one of the partners can be, the power comes out of if it is a large-scale investment needs to happen upfront in a project. Now, who will pay for the cost and who will have a model to recover that? Or is it a welfare spending? Or in some case, it may be a knowledge or intellectual property which will make a difference to something. Or in some other case, it may be a social mobilization which is paramount. So depending on who will make the difference like a keystone on this whole platform, and two, who can take accountability for the outcomes, as also for balancing this give and ask of the multiple partners. So project specific, different sets of players, anyone can be.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks. Now let's talk about ITC's sustainable achievements. As we spoke about earlier, ITC set their own goals, but I think always when we look at sustainability, it's the impact which counts. And if you really look at the triple bottom line, or if you look at the impact that ITC is being able to have in being carbon positive, water positive, waste management positive, and each of these for over 10 years now, it's terrific. It's very, very impressive. It'll be great to hear from you something more you can share about the water positive journey.
Yeah, I think water is absolutely very crucial for the world at large, and even more so for agriculture-based value chains that we are part of, as also for the quality of life of people in terms of drinking water and so on, as also for industrial establishments. As I say, water is the elixir of life. And if you're saying, can we go and live on a Mars or somewhere else, the first thing you're searching for is water.
Yeah.
So therefore, water was a key thing that we were looking at when we looked at our sustainability journey nearly 25 years ago. And within water, there are two kinds of initiatives. The longest journey of all these more than 2 decades was on the supply side. As you know, we have plenty of rainfall.
Yeah.
but rain runs off because we don't harvest it right. And therefore, how do we enable rainwater harvesting is where the journey started. And look at water structures, traditional, conventional, and how do you really revive, build new as required, and hold water. Since this needs to be done at a farmer level in case of agriculture, at an industrial establishment level for a factory and so on, so we need to really motivate and mobilize the respective stakeholders. So getting farmers to become water users associations and work on harvesting and get the right kind of structure renovated or built, and then create capacity to hold water. So that's the effort. Water Users Association and water structure is not new to this world. It's well known. But I think where ITC brought a difference is in first building the capacity of the farmers in understanding the partnerships I talked about, the mutual respect and complementarity. So the social mobilization first comes to that kind of a social capital being built that unless we come together, none of us are going to gain in this. I can't create in every circumstance my own water harvesting capacity. I have a limited piece of land. If I dig a pond within that, then I have not enough to cultivate my land. Then in many cases, there is an upstream and a downstream. Work has to happen at an upstream for the entire set of farms and downstream to get connected. So that complementarity of people working together, that social capital has to be built first. So spend time on that before you just invest in a structure. And then the second piece is that after you build a structure, it has to be an enduring kind of structure that needs to be maintained. It needs to be appropriately democratized in terms of water being distributed among all the stakeholders. So therefore, the governance capacity needs to be built for people to self-govern, saying that, okay, 40 of us came together. This is how we are going to equitably divide water amongst us. This is what we are going to pay to us to maintain the structure in terms of desilting, ensuring that the place is properly maintained and the canal is done right and so on. Once only these things are done, do we then come in with technical input and financial input and also ensure that part of the money is raised by all these water users themselves so that there is a stake and ownership on the ground in managing this whole thing. So the amount of time in creating these kind of enablers is really what made this successful today. In fact, the total scale is about 1.2 million acres of land is irrigated by virtue of more than 22,000 structures which we facilitated building, and as much as 43 million cubic meters of water harvesting potential. So that's the kind of a scale at which it is done. And more interestingly, along our journey in the last 3 years, we have discovered something which is even more important. This is the demand side. We always looked at demand side, but an organized effort at demand side, when we looked at the crops that we are engaged in, we saw that farmers also grow a lot of water guzzling crops that are being grown. So if we can make use of efficient agronomic practices, right micro irrigation systems, then water can be saved. So more crop per drop. And through water saving, actually you can create many more multiples of water harvested equivalent. So in these 2 years, since it is relatively new, we worked on about 3 lakh acres. But by virtue of the change in economic practices, the amount of water that is saved, what will get saved annually, is over 200 million cubic meters. I mean, almost 5x of what we've done over 20 years.
Wow.
just managed in these 2 years. So that's the kind of opportunity in demand side management. But what will make it work? Well, again, technologies are well known.
Yeah.
We have many partners in terms of agri universities and other global academia and all of that, which help us in designing. But I think the value chain integration of saying that, okay, save water by itself is not a message that is easily understood and adopted. But to say when you save water, you are simultaneously improving quality of your produce. You are able to take a third crop in a year.
Yeah.
You are able to fetch a better price for your produce. You are going to reduce your cost and therefore increase your profitability. Then it is more likely to be adopted. So I think that demand side management effort is something that is we are seeing as a very clear path-breaking input. And in fact, that gave us a very ambitious kind of an aspiration that we now set for ourselves, that for all the supply chain for our agricultural produce, by 2030, we will be net zero as far as water is concerned.
That's
so obviously
amazing.
Water is an integral for growing any crop. But we will work with our farmers in our catchments that if I'm buying wheat to make Ashirwad Atta and if so much water is getting consumed, I'll also work with the farmer to reduce water consumption. And I also work with other things in cycle, even though we may not be buying those crops. Let's say a paddy wheat cycle in some form, or the same farmer is growing sugarcane somewhere else or some other horticulture crop. Try and reduce the water consumption by the farmer, that the entire water that is being consumed in growing wheat that we are buying is offset through this kind of water saving. So that's the kind of an aspiration that we said now it's possible through demand side management. So that's a kind of a water journey that we have taken and are looking forward to in further expanding this.
Wonderful. Really nice to hear that. I'm sure there'll be a lot of positive response to all of these initiatives. In fact, sometimes we hear these cynicists, people always saying that, oh, companies who trumpet their sustainability are doing it only for PR and image, and how justified it is. So, I mean, I feel that when companies talk about all the work that they're doing, it's an inspiration and motivation for a lot more people to join in. But happy to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, there are good reasons for that kind of skepticism. When you hear a lot more sound than the steps behind those sounds, I mean, obviously there's a reason to be skeptical. But I think times have changed. There are companies which are looking at sustainability with a genuine kind of interest. But I think where it can really get to be done on this kind of a scale, in addition to the intent, I think where it really are backed with appropriate steps is when the business objectives and sustainability objectives are not seen as trade-offs. That I earn if I need to do something sustainable, I spend. Then there's obviously going to be a limitation in terms of what businesses can do.
True.
But when you really enmesh these two objectives and say that the only way I earn more profit is by becoming more sustainable, making my supply chain more green or making my farmers more profitable, and create that kind of innovation. So that is when scale is possible. Then for my own business progress, I need to be sustainable. And the only way I can make the whole ecosystem sustainable is by scaling my business and progress it to be more profitable. I think when that enmeshing happens, then there is no reason for PR as an objective, because the steps then create that kind of sum. And for 16 years, for example, we've been publishing audited sustainability report in terms of what is done on the numbers I talked about on water, or on also you mentioned about carbon, solid waste, recycling, number of livelihoods we are supporting, and all of these. So all of these are audited and on large scale because of this kind of innovation. And then obviously the reputation and image are byproducts if you do things right. So the idea is that, exactly like you said, you communicate a message and inspire people that you can actually do well by doing good. These are not two different things. And I think when that happens, then the world will be a better place. And so that's where we come from.
Absolutely. And that was a topic, right? It was corporate sustainability or responsible competitiveness. Is it a myth or a reality? And I think ITC has proven that it's not a myth, it's a reality. As you rightly said, it's not just enough about making profits, but also how are you doing the good, and hence enriching the environment or creating sustainable livelihoods is extremely important. Tell me, Shiv, this last year and a half with COVID, and I know that there's been a lot of agility, resilience, and compassion shown by ITC. And we saw it in many ways, whether it was new products, whether it was making workplaces more safe, hygienic, or extending help and support to your employees, suppliers, extended partners. So how easy was it to change gears and enable the same? Would love to hear your side of the story on this.
Yeah, so in a sense, ITC always operated on a three-horizon framework. That means you are really operating on multiple gears at the same time. You know, producing better result this quarter doesn't mean you are compromising in the long term. Or if you are focusing on long term, doesn't mean that you can take liberty of not producing the right results in the short term. So you need your portfolio of businesses, your portfolio of initiatives in such a manner that you are simultaneously dealing with all the horizons. So today, tomorrow, and day after. And I think that ability to straddle the multiple times also helped in this period of pandemic in making the agility come through in this context as well. So, you know, in the three horizons now are one, you know, obviously you need to survive through this pandemic. You need to revive when the context is right. And you also need to thrive in the new normal. So it's a simultaneous three horizons that you are working on. It also benefited the diversity of ITC because we had some businesses which suddenly had the great opportunity, the whole healthcare, hygiene, staple, many of that. Whereas businesses like hotels suffered, out-of-home consumption, food service suffered. So therefore, you are looking at multiple realities at the same time. And therefore, that consumer centricity and dealing with this multiple kind of realities at the same time helped in accelerating that agility. We talked about compassion. It comes out of the belief system that you are a trustee of all the stakeholders. And the very clear belief that businesses cannot succeed in failing societies. Some people are more vulnerable in pandemics like this. So unless you're putting your shoulders together, the credo of ITC is sab saath bade. If there is a vulnerable section of the society in your business vicinity or attached with a value chain suffers, there's no way business can prosper. So that's where the compassion comes from, out of your value system and the belief. So it was not really so much as changing gears as much as making use of all three gears simultaneously. That's not a right analogy, but you need to straddle all the three terms and horizons is really what made us do what we did in this period.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. I think that's really, really nice. Because even in this entire event, the Spark event that we have this session is all about inclusion, innovation, and impact. And today we spoke about inclusion and we spoke about the small marginal farmer, the agriculture sector. We talked about innovation, the agri-tech, the ecosystem that you're talking about, the integrated. And I think the impact is, we can really see the impact that ITC has been able to create in all of these environments, whether it's the various initiatives or the carbon and the water and the waste management, has been really, really positive impact. So I think it really helps us to prove that responsible competitiveness is actually can be a reality if you have the right focus. And when I look at some of the things I've heard you and ITC talk about, it's really about reimagining the future and reimagining sustainability and reimagining resilience so that we can actually reimagine growth, which is truly enriching the environment and creating sustainable livelihoods. I really wanted to thank you, Shiv, for being here. And any last message for our audience?
Yeah, no, basically just to reinforce what I said during our conversation, that, for 5,000 years, we have organized ourselves as a society in terms of businesses, the governments, and the civil society, looking at wealth, welfare, and well-being. But to the disgrace of the entire society, at the end of these 5,000 years, we have very poor statistics to talk about. The top 1% wealthy own 50% of the world's wealth. And the bottom 50% own just about 1%. This is something that we all need to be shameful about. The environment front, end of this month, we are completing half of this year. But we have used nearly 85% of all the resources that we will regenerate in this year. That means we are basically stealing from our children just to carry on our lives currently. This again is disgraceful. So I think the conventional thinking that this is the role of corporate and therefore they will do nothing else, or this is the role of government and so on, I think that we need to really forget and move on to partnerships with mutual trust. Corporates can bring enormous amount of innovative capacity, project management capacity, and in partnership with governments and civil society and academia, can change the situation, that transformation. See it in right spirit, while there may be reason for some skepticism. So unless we walk that path and embrace every part of the society, we can't change this, and that's a kind of a transformation power that exists. So my message really is that embrace this opportunity to make a difference to this world.
Thank you. I'm sure a lot of our audience is going to embrace this opportunity to make this difference to the world and look at how we can reimagine growth and sustainability. So thanks a lot, Shiv, for being here with us. Have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's been a great conversation. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.